The land of the free and the home of the brave isn't just a nice ending for our national anthem. It defines the very concept that enabled common people from throughout the world to build the greatest nation ever seen on earth. But that concept is under attack by those who would rule, regulate, restrict, license, monopolize, and suffocate the people into something less. The Sheboygan Liberty Coalition and its partners across eastern Wisconsin invite you to an eye-opening presentation by author Tom DeWeese called Agenda 21, The Wrenching Transformation of America. Discover the many ways our unalienable rights are already being systematically reduced so that others may establish a country where the free and the brave are once again made subjects of unbending foreign rule, and find out whose idea this is. Don't miss Agenda 21, The Wrenching Transformation of America.
Thank you. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. Not just because you've come to hear me speak, but because, whether you knew it or not, when you walked through that door tonight, you joined a revolution. A revolution is taking place across this country. It wasn't long ago when we were speaking to very empty rooms about this issue, and over the last year and a half, this issue is exploding across the country, and there are hundreds of meetings like this taking place. And our audiences are growing, our passion is growing, we're now getting elected officials coming to us, talking to us, asking us for information. That is a revolution. You joined it when you came in the door, and I thank you for that. To lay the proper foundation for our discussion today on Agenda 21, let me begin with this quote by Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged. She said, quote, "When you see that trading is done not by consent, but by compulsion, when you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing, when you see money flowing to those who deal not in goods but in favors, when you see that men get richer by graft and pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed." And I do believe that that is exactly what we're talking about happening here in America. Property, liberty, the rule of law. These are the founding principles of the United States of America. We hear these words, yet many Americans fail to understand their meaning or how they affect our everyday lives. Our founding fathers warned us that eternal vigilance was necessary in order to protect our liberties. They have been ignored. And life in America has begun to change. You all know that there's something very wrong in America. Every day, government at every level grows more out of control, more intrusive into our personal lives, more of a threat to private property, all in total and flagrant disregard of the expressed will of the electorate. The fact is, most Americans have begun to fear our own government. Life is getting harder. There is less optimism about the future. You know, the once prominent American phrase, American dream, seems to have dropped from our vocabulary. Well, the reason? America is going through what Al Gore called a wrenching transformation of our society. What kind of transformation? What has changed? Where did this transformation originate, and how does it affect our daily lives? The old structure of what was once the United States of America is being replaced with a new political and economic order that is drastically changing the very underpinnings of our nation. It's being done quietly, behind the scenes, without debate, without votes, and with no official announcement. Yet, this new ruling authority has become the official policy of the federal government and every state government, and is moving rapidly into nearly every city, town, and county in this nation. The ruling authority is called sustainable development, and its blueprint for transforming human existence is fully outlined in a UN document called Agenda 21. Well, I've had over 18 years of experience in studying every aspect of sustainable development in Agenda 21, and I have learned that it is an absolute threat to everything free Americans hold dear. Here's what I know. Over the past 20 years, a strange new language has begun to take over our government. Today, the typical city council meeting discusses comprehensive development, density, historic preservation, and partnerships between private businesses and government. City leaders organize community meetings run by facilitators as they outline a vision for the town enforced by consensus. Wetlands, conservation easements, watersheds, viewsheds, rails to trails, biosphere reserves, greenways, carbon footprints, partnerships, preservation, stakeholders, land use, environmental protection, development, diversity, visioning, open space, heritage areas, comprehensive planning, critical thinking, and community service are all part of this new language. What are they really talking about? Where was such language first developed? Well, the term sustainable development was born on the pages of a United Nations document called Our Common Future. That was the official report of the 1987 UN World Commission on Environment and Development. As a result of this report, for the first time, the use of environmental protection and human development were tied to the age-old socialist goals of international redistribution of wealth. And that is the key to understanding the true purpose of sustainable development in all of its policies, control of all facets of our economy. Here's how the United Nations described Agenda 21 in one of its own publications in 1993 in an article entitled Agenda 21, the Earth Summit Strategy to Save the Planet. It said, quote, Agenda 21 proposes an array of actions which are intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. It calls for specific changes in the activities of all people. Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of all humans, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. End quote. Have you ever heard a more powerful manifesto issued for the purpose of government? And yet, when you and I point this out and protest against it, we are attacked as fringe radicals. Well, here is the exact course that brought Agenda 21 to America and into your local community. At the top of the infrastructure, pushing sustainable development is the United Nations Environmental Program, or the UNEP. But the UNEP doesn't operate on its own. Influencing it are thousands of non-governmental organizations, NGOs. These are private groups which seek to implement a specific political agenda. And through the UN infrastructure, particularly through the UNEP, they have great power. And I should point out that a true NGO isn't a group that just pops up and says, hey, we're an NGO. These are groups that are officially sanctioned and certified by the United Nations in order for them to participate in these international meetings. Prior to the 1992 UN Earth Summit in Rio, these sanctioned NGO groups spent considerable time writing and creating a document that would be introduced to the world as Agenda 21. And at the Earth Summit, 172 heads of state from all over the world signed agreement to Agenda 21, including President George H.W. Bush. Agenda 21 is not a treaty that has to be ratified by the Senate. Rather, it's what's known as a soft law policy, a guideline that the nation agrees to implement through its own legislative process. That's why it's difficult to follow the bouncing ball from the UN all the way down through government into your backyard. But while proponents of Agenda 21 use this fact that it's all voluntary to dismiss our concerns, claiming that it's just a voluntary suggestion, that is a far step from the truth. Step by step, this suggestion has become the force of government. Before I'm done tonight, I'll go through it 3 times how this happens. President Bush, in signing the document, committed the United States to implement the policies of Agenda 21. Agenda 21 then gained huge momentum when in 1993 President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852 to create the President's Council on Sustainable Development and made it official U.S. policy. And take a look at who served on that council, and you will see many of the same NGOs which helped write Agenda 21 for the UN. They include Jonathan Lash of the World Resources Institute, one of the 3 most powerful organizations influencing the UNEP. Also on the President's Council were John Sawhill of the Nature Conservancy, and Jay Hare of the National Wildlife Federation, and Michelle Perrault, International Vice President of the Sierra Club. All players in the creation of Agenda 21 at the international level, at the UN, now openly serving on the President's Council with the specific mission of implementing Agenda 21 into American policy. And there's an even more direct connection between Agenda 21 and our federal government. Included at the UNEP table to develop the policy along with all these NGO groups who helped write all these things are these players from the federal government. These include the Department of State, the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Agriculture, the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. These agencies send representatives to all UNEP meetings. They work with the NGOs. They sit there and work out policy to be enforced on you. Now, why do they do that if Agenda 21 is just a myth that has no effect on our government? Because that's what we're told over and over and over again. Agenda 21 is just an idea. You might remember a great deal of discussion during the Clinton administration about the idea of a reinvention of government. Now, some people thought this meant that government had finally found its senses and it was going to live within the Constitution and be limited. Well, Vice President Al Gore was put in charge of that reinvention. Should have been our first clue. The reinvention, of course, was sustainable development. The purpose of the President's Council was to translate the guidelines of Agenda 21 into public policy to be administered by the federal government. And that step-by-step process translated into the ruling authority through which a UN plan, Agenda 21, has become unquestioned U.S. policy throughout the nation. Sustainable development is not a local idea or local policy. So, what is sustainable development? Well, one hint, it is not environmental policy. Sustainable development is about planned central economies and redistribution of wealth on a local, state, national, and international level. The process by which it is implemented creates a matrix of locked-away land or severe land use controls, control of energy and energy production, control of transportation, control of industry, control of food production, control of development, control of water availability, and control of population size and growth. But of course, most of these policies and regulations are issued under the excuse of protecting the environment. And Agenda 21 is not just policy. It is a complete system to change the way we think, the way we react, the way we make decisions, and those who promote it have very specific answers as to how they want each of you to do these things. That's why they call it an agenda. Let me show you what I mean. The logo for sustainable development that's used in most of their literature are 3 connecting circles. Each one is labeled. One is labeled social equity, another is economic prosperity, and the third is ecological integrity. We know them commonly as the 3 E's. Let me take them one at a time. Let's start with social equity. I will tell you straight out, if you fail to grasp the social equity aspect of sustainable development, then you simply have no grasp of this issue, period. Social equity is based on a demand for social justice. Have you heard this term used? Social justice. Social equity and social justice require that the world's wealth be shared between those who produce and those who don't. It's every welfare program and welfare redistribution scheme ever proposed. Redistribution of wealth, by the way, means everyone is equally poor, not equally rich. It means no one can move forward unless everyone can move forward together. A utopian myth that cannot be achieved through government edict. And Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. What more do you need to know? Barack Obama, recently in his State of the Union speech, that whole speech was based completely on social justice. When he called for economic fairness, he really meant redistribution of wealth. And of course, he was very disdainfully attacking tax cuts for the rich. Today, the term is used throughout sustainabilist literature, and it is the root of new policy initiatives. The sustainablist system is based on the principles that individuals must give up selfish wants for the needs of the common good or the community. Every time you hear these policies talking about the community, they're not just talking about Fond du Lac. They're talking about the common good, the community. Be aware of that. This is the same policy behind the push to eliminate our nation's borders, to allow the migration of those from other nations into the United States to share our individually created wealth and our taxpayer-paid government social programs. Borders, they say, stop the natural migration of the human race. National sovereignty, they say, is a social injustice. According to the sustainabilists, it is a social injustice for some to have prosperity if others do not. Profits are made at the expense of the people. In short, social equity through sustainable development is a means to a forced utopia which promises health care for all, jobs for all, housing for all, equality for all. A Kumbaya hug for us all. Agenda 21 means the individual is subservient to the needs of the greater good of society, and that's what they mean every time local legislation talks about the community. Do not forget that. The second E, economic prosperity. At the root of Agenda 21 economics are public-private partnerships, pulled together into a government-driven economy called corporatism. It is not capitalism or free markets, though it may have some of the trappings. The marketplace is still there. But ultimately, corporatism does not trust the marketplace to do what the elites want done. The partnerships allow for special tax breaks, access to land for some developers, but not others. Non-compete clauses. Free enterprise and a non-compete clause? Of course not. Non-compete clauses in government projects that guarantee profits, access to grants and lucrative special government projects, and much more. Under public-private partnerships, there is a guarantee of protection and profits. Corporations that play ball get the power of government, and government gets to hide behind the independence of private business. Thus, the partnership between corporations and government is done at the expense of ordinary people, the exact opposite effect of free markets controlled by consumers. This is the new way business is being run in America under sustainable development. The business plan of the day: lobby for regulations. They argue that it's good for the economy, creating jobs by destroying things from the past. They say it's good for the economy to enforce regulations to make people buy things they didn't need before. It's certainly not free enterprise or open markets. The true description is government-sanctioned monopolies, right out of the Mussolini fascist playbook. And the third E, ecological integrity. Well, that's just the excuse for all of it. Sustainabilist policy interprets any action man takes as a direct threat to the environment. Sustainabilists contend that humans only defile nature. And only a strong, central, all-powerful government can protect the environment. Individuals and limited government can't be trusted because man is nothing more than a swarm of locusts which swoops down on nature and sucks it clean until there's nothing left. Nothing good comes from man, according to sustainabilist doctrine. And private property ownership and control is a main target of sustainable development. Consider this quote from the report of the 1976 United Nations Habitat 1 Conference, one of the precursors for Agenda 21, which said this, quote, "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice." How many bought your property hoping it would gain value and you would begin to build wealth that way? You are committing a social injustice. Shame on you. The fact is, Agenda 21 is a blueprint to completely change our society to a top-down planned central economy in a strange mixture of socialism, fascism, and corporatism. To convince Americans to accept it required something that would get us to sacrifice our natural rights voluntarily. We keep hearing that word, voluntarily. The answer was environmental Armageddon. You must sacrifice freedom to protect the planet. It's urgent, we're told. Consider this quote by Alexander King, one of the co-founders of the Club of Rome. He said, in quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity." End quote. So, the urgency is on. Global warming is feeding the hysteria. There's no time to consider things like individual concerns and wants and needs. Selfish, cries the sustainabilist. We must save the environment. Go green. Get out of your cars. Stop using energy. Sacrifice. Cut your carbon footprint or perish. So, federal and state governments working hand in hand with a horde of non-governmental organizations, the shock troops, these private groups with personal political agendas, the stormtroopers, force passage of rules and regulations passed down to local communities. But, say your local elected officials, none of that UN socialist stuff is true. Nothing like that happening here. These are just conspiracy theories by right-wing radicals. We're just creating the tools necessary in a local effort to manage growth and development for our community, they say. Have you heard these denials? Then consider this quote by J. Gary Lawrence, a planner from the city of Seattle and an advisor to the President's Council on Sustainable Development. He said, quote, "Participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official undertaking local Agenda 21. So, we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth." Local indeed. The fact is, This is a political movement led by those who seek to control the world economy, dictate development, and redistribute the world's wealth. They use the philosophical base of Karl Marx, the tactics of Adolf Hitler, and the rhetoric of the Sierra Club. Everything connected with sustainable development translates to higher costs, shortages, and sacrifice. The best way to understand what sustainable development actually is can be found by discovering what they consider is not sustainable. Maurice Strong, the Secretary General who ran the Earth Summit in 1992, said this, quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class," that's you, by the way, "involving high meat intake," I ate at Applebee's tonight, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing, your house, are not sustainable. Obviously, the opposite is sustainable. Get rid of the house, get rid of the air conditioning, get rid of the appliances, the fossil fuels, and the people. We'll get to that. So,
do they ever get real?
How is this wrenching transformation being put into place? There are 4 very specific routes being used. In the rural areas, it's called the Wildlands Project. In the cities, it's called smart growth. In business, it's called public-private partnerships. And in government, it's called stakeholder councils and non-elected boards and regional governments, or reinvented government. Let's take them one at a time. First, the Wildlands Project was the brainchild of Earth First Dave Foreman, one of the most radical environmental groups of all time. And it literally calls for the rewilding, his words, of 50% of all the land in every state back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus set foot on this land. In 1983, when Foreman first dreamed up the scheme for the Wildlands Project, he said, quote, "It is not enough to preserve the roadless, undeveloped country remaining. We must recreate wilderness in large regions, move out the cars and civilized people, dismantle the roads and dams, reclaim the plowed lands and clear cuts, and reintroduce extirpated species." It's like reading the front page of the New York Times. Destruction of human civilization was his goal. In reality, the Wildlands Project is a diabolical plan to herd people off the rural lands and into human settlements. And that doesn't just mean farmers. That means towns and rural areas. To kill them, to eliminate them. From the demented mind of Dave Foreman, the plan became the blueprint of the UN's Biodiversity Treaty. So now the scheme is international in scope with the power of law. Thomas Lovejoy, a science advisor for the Federal Department of Interior, said, quote, "We will map the whole nation, determine development for the whole country, and regulate it." And your local elected officials are helping to implement this insanity. Yet, they are quick to deny that such ideas have their origins on an international level. They accuse me of wearing a tinfoil hat and hearing voices. Well, here's a voice I hear. Again, Maurice Strong said at the UN's Earth Summit, quote, "Isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized nations collapse? Isn't it our responsibility to bring that about?" Again, right off the front pages of the newspapers. And that, my friends, is the true agenda we face. But how do you move people off the land? Well, there's many tools in place to stop human activity and grow the wilderness. Deny grazing and water rights on public lands. It becomes more difficult and more expensive to run the farm or the ranch, particularly out in the West. Eventually, he goes out of business. Lock away natural resources by creating more national parks. It shuts down the mines, and they go out of business. Or you just, as has happened recently here, you just ban the mine altogether and kill 300,000 jobs. Call every mosquito-infested swamp and occasional mud puddle a wetlands. and ban any development around it. Invent a spotted owl shortage and pretend it can't live in a forest where timber is cut. Shut off the forest, then when no trees are cut, there's nothing to feed the mills and there are no jobs and it goes out of business. And many times out in the West where this has happened, whole towns have died. They're now ghost towns.
It happened here.
This happened here. The governor of Maryland is enforcing an agenda without a vote by the legislature, it's by executive order, called Plan Maryland, that will lock away over 400,000 acres of land, banned from any development. One of the key provisions of the policy to make this happen is to ban septic tanks as a means to protect the Chesapeake Bay. Even though there is no evidence anywhere that septic tanks cause any damage whatsoever. The only result of the ban will be to make it impossible to live in a rural area, unless you want to spend several $1 million on your own private water treatment system and then try to get one of these bureaucrats to approve it. Getting people off the rural lands and moving them into the cities is the real purpose, not environmental protection. The Wildlands Project comes in many names and many programs: wilderness areas, comprehensive land use plans, bikeways, greenways, heritage areas, land management, rails to trails, open space, wolf and bear reintroduction, conservation easements, many, many more. Each of these programs is designed to make it just a little harder to live on the land, a little more expensive, a little more hopeless. In reality, the process is simply herding people off the rural land and into human habitat areas or the cities. The second path to sustainable development is called smart growth. They put a line around the city and they tell you that no growth can take place outside of that line. Urban sprawl, they say disdainfully. They refuse to build more roads as a ploy to get you out of your cars and into public transportation, restricting mobility. New highways, they say, are feeders to more development. They even stop widening existing roads for the same reasons. So then roads become overcrowded and gridlock, and they blame development. Their new ploy is to force cars to share the road with bicycles. The complete street, they call it. They believe that the harder it becomes for you to drive your car, the more likely you will be to just give up and ride a bike. And I keep asking them when I meet them, you ride your bike to work? I haven't found one yet who does. In many smart growth cities and new apartment buildings now have no garages or parking lots. Don't want any stinking cars here. Smart growth creates an unnatural restriction on space inside the controlled city limits, so there's a shortage of land and there's a shortage of houses. And what happens? Prices go up. And that means populations will have to be controlled because, of course, that shortage of land. And that's why kind, compassionate environmentalist, the popular Dr. Jacques Cousteau declared, quote, "In order to stabilize world populations, we must eliminate 350,000 people per day." And he's not the only one. Sustainabilists call for an 85% reduction in human population. When you understand that, when you understand that that's the goal, then the controls on food production, the stupid windmills, all of that can't possibly produce everything you need, well, of course it can't. But if we only have 15% of the population, hey, we can do it. That's the point of it. Now, I've made arrangements with the folks who organized tonight. When you leave tonight, out in the hall, there are going to be containers of Kool-Aid. And I want each of you to do your patriotic duty and take a drink. And I assure you, there'll be no environmentalists in line in front of you. 85% reduction in the population. How's that to be done? Do we use the proven success of China's population control methods of forced abortion and sterilization? The Chinese, I can tell you, are big supporters of sustainable development. Anything that controls something, they're for it. And I'm sure that they've got all kinds of ideas they'd love to share with us. One sure way To cut population is to, as I mentioned, control food production. I want to warn you now, because I know there are farmers here, people who live in the rural areas. Beware of sustainable farming. Sustainable farming is not organic or natural farming. They like to confuse that. It's not. Sustainable farming is a political and economic control of food production and land use. According to sustainable doctrine, quote, a sustainable community is one which provides all of its own needs for air, water, land, or food and fiber, and energy resources within the confines of its own site. End quote. In other words, everything that is consumed in a community is produced in that community. You like bananas?
Sorry.
Gone. Under this utopian vision, nothing is transported or imported in order to save energy and cut back on the use of trucks and trains and ships. But things that would be imported will have some sort of a tax on it. So, of course, the prices will be up. So, in the smart growth community, farmland is inside what is now called an urban growth boundary, a UGB. The use of the now limited farmland is called a food shed or a food circle, and is tightly controlled by what essentially becomes community-owned farms. All farming practices can only follow strict guidelines set down by government bureaucrats who've never seen a farm in the first place. Once again, the only result can be food shortages, higher prices, and sacrifice. That will certainly lead to the urgency to reduce populations. Of course, all of these ideas are enforced through the creation of comprehensive development plans. These are the tools of choice in nearly every city in the nation to produce the proper smart growth community. Through these plans, energy and water use is tightly controlled. All individuals are being forced to live in denser communities and take up the smaller tracts of land per housing unit. Planning advocates and government bureaucrats are forcing such planned communities across the state and nation, and those plans put severe controls on private property. The fact is, in a sustainable and a smart growth community, there can be no private property. It is community property. And the third way to sustainable development, inside the human habitat areas in our cities and our towns, government is steadily being controlled by an elite ruling class called stakeholder councils. These are mostly NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which like thieves in the night just show up to stake their claim to enforce their own private agendas. The function of legitimate government within the sustainable system is fast becoming little more than the rubber stamp to create and enforce the dictates of the councils. It is the demise of representative government. And the councils appear and grow almost overnight. You'll find watershed councils that regulate human action near every trickling stream, river, or lake. Meters are put on wells. Special action councils control home size, tree pruning, or removal, even the color you can paint your own house, or how high your grass grows. Historic preservation councils control development in downtown areas, disallowing expansion and new building. And I'm going to tell you, because most of you here tonight, I believe, consider yourselves to be conservative, but you also share a love for your country, a love for your history. Historic preservation means something to you. They're using that term to sucker you in. It's not historic preservation, it's just control. Once the councils are established, it becomes nearly impossible to discuss issues with your local elected officials. Instead, they will automatically refer you to the proper council or administration or department run by unresponsive appointed hacks armed with their own political agenda. Regional governments are driven by government, not people, not you. These are run by non-elected bureaucrats that don't answer to the people. The Chattanooga, Tennessee Area Regional Council of Governments, for example, consists of at least 6 alphabet agencies of appointed bureaucrats. On their own, these unelected bureaucrats have applied for a $2.5 million grant from the federal government's Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program. To comply, get the grant, each participating government must sign a memorandum of agreement to develop a shared vision and to develop livable communities and all that applies. The people of Chattanooga have no idea that this has been done, and they have no say in the outcome. 16 counties and all the municipalities that are contained within the constraints of this are constrained by this grant application and the 40-year regional plan it produces. These non-elected councils fit almost perfectly the definition of a state Soviet, a system of councils that report to an apex council and then implement a predetermined outcome. Soviets are an operating mechanism of a government-controlled economy, the exact opposite of a constitutional republic. The fourth path to sustainable development, as I mentioned earlier, are public-private partnerships. You hear the propaganda of the public-private partnerships nightly on your television as their commercials keep telling you over and over again, go green. The truth is, there would be very little legitimate green industry if not for the billions of dollars of grant money shelled out to the partnerships to develop alternative energy schemes. And in fact, wind energy may well be the least sustainable and least eco-friendly of all electricity options. It probably requires more energy to manufacture, haul, and install these monstrous windmills and their transmission systems than that windmill will generate in its lifetime. And yet, in the name of sustainable development, this country is investing everything in our future to enforce them over real energy providers. Alternative energy amounts to less than 1% of our energy needs, and for every green job created, 2 in legitimate industry are lost because of green rules and regulations. America has now discovered that we have a near infinite amount of shale oil in literally every state. Rather than celebrate our good fortune to reduce gas prices and eliminate our dependency on foreign oil cartels, the sustainabilists are rushing in a near panic to block the drilling of shale oil. Moreover, recent government reports show we have more than 2 trillion barrels of untapped oil under American soil, untapped and banned because of sustainable policy. To the sustainabilist elite, who loathe competition and free markets and who have their own agenda afoot, such a change in the status quo to discover something that will save us, something that will lower the cost of energy, something that will give us an abundant amount of energy is terrifying because their control is highly profitable for those industries that take the tax money through the public-private partnerships. And now, there is a new kind of corporation being developed through public-private partnerships. It's called benefit corporations. Imagine a legislated brotherhood of business where favored businesses get to go to the front of the line for permits, licenses, and opportunities merely because they agree to advance the principles of sustainable development in Agenda 21. 6 states already have benefit corporation legislation: Hawaii, Virginia, Maryland, Vermont, New Jersey, and New York. And 5 more are in the process of making it part of their state corporate legal system, including California, of course, Colorado, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. This policy will destroy free enterprise and guarantee that we cannot stop Agenda 21.